Welcome, Lowell. Welcome to an exciting new program, Eye on You. I am thrilled to be back here again with you. I'm Bridget Driscoll, and I'll be your host for today, along with co-host Cassie Robico. I just want to say that this production is a student production from the University of Massachusetts Lowell in collaboration with LTC. The focus of today's show is going to be on a new era of growth at the university. We are actually speaking to the leadership at the helm today, and for the second portion of it, we will be talking to the student government, and then finally we'll go out into the field and speak to the headmaster of Lowell High School. But first, I'd like to kick off and introduce the students that make this all possible. We have Connor Baldwin. Connor, are you a history major?
Yes, history major.
And I understand that Connor's a DJ.
Yes, on the side.
Okay. And then to Connor's left, we have Michelle Bradley, who is the editor-in-chief of The Connector.
Yes.
Michelle, thanks for joining us
Thank
today. And then finally, I'd like to extend a special warm welcome to Interim Chancellor David McKenzie. Thank you for joining us. And
pleasure to be here.
Taking time out of your busy schedule. And for those of you that have not met, Provost John Wooding. Dr. Wooding, thank you for joining us. I'd like to actually start off the questionings to the Chancellor McKenzie. And I understand, I read that UMass President Jack Wilson selected you in part because of your service to the public. Can you tell us what has inspired you, or whom has inspired you to the dedication?
Well, I wouldn't say it's one thing particularly, but I guess the first thing is sort of classic for people of my generation. It was John Kennedy. You know, when I was 14 years old, he was running for president, and you know, that was a really big deal, and it was just wonderful to see someone who brought so much enthusiasm and such a sense of dedication to the country. We really hadn't had that before, and sometimes I think we haven't had it since. And so that was the first thing. And then there have been a number of things. I don't know how long you want me to go on about this, but you know, I would say after he was killed, my interest sort of went away, you know, and what really sort of revived it was, I would say, sort of being drafted. I was drafted out of graduate school and was in the Army during the Vietnam War, and that brought a lot of reality to my life. And that before then I was kind of a propeller head. I mean, I was a big academic guy and, you know, all this stuff. And I really kind of saw that it was time to sort of ironically, leave the academic area and get into the reality of life and things, you know, things that are happening that people are being hurt by. So that was really my inspiration at that point. Ironically, I find myself back in academia now. So it's kind of a long circle around.
Right. And Provost Wooding, how about you? What has inspired you, or whom has inspired you? I understand you're from England, and
yes. Originally, I was from England. I want to tell you I was inspired by Keith Richards. Probably that's what you're looking for. Though that's certainly partly true. A lot of my inspiration probably came from my own father, who was a working class man who very much deeply believed in social justice. He was a conscientious objector during the Second World War. And that I grew up in England at a period when a lot of really good things were happening, but a lot of very bad things at the same time. Britain was recovering from World War II. When I was a very young man, so young practically an embryo, but when the Beatles first hit the scene in England in the early 1960s, I was a kid, and for the first time I think the Beatles, and John Lennon in particular, was on TV, and for a working class kid in England, for that accent to be heard on television was the first time I ever heard it, which is an accent I had, even though you Americans can't tell my accent. And it led me to really believe there was some possibility that I could move from these sort of humble background and beginnings into a world which could be exciting and interesting and wouldn't demean people from working class backgrounds. So I guess that in some senses the Beatles were a major impact on me as a group, with John Lennon in particular. And later on, particularly his politics as they developed in the late 60s and early 70s, were critical to me thinking about the world. And then on the other side of it, you know, I never really meant to go into academia. It wasn't something I ever thought I would end up in. And In fact, when I graduated high school, I worked for 2 years in a slaughterhouse in my hometown, which looks very much like Lowell. You could replace the textile mills with boot and shoe mills. But I then had the opportunity, a teacher at my high school found out that I had these very high qualifications of how do you graduate from school in England, and could have gone to university. And I thought, well, it's better than working in a slaughterhouse. Practically anything is better than working in a slaughterhouse. I went to university in London, and which was a very exciting time to be in London. The early 1970s, the Carnaby Street thing had been playing out, and Europe was. We were fighting against the Vietnam War at that point.
Right.
I spent a lot of my undergraduate life throwing bricks at the American embassy, and then graduated in 1975.
This is all being recorded.
Yeah, I know.
So you were a rebel.
It informs this past, I think, and I think it actually gives me a connection with the students that's perhaps a little bit different, and because I grew up in England, and that when I came out of university, there were 1 million unemployed in England. I was unemployed for a while, and I had maybe 20 different jobs: construction, sweeping streets, cleaning bathrooms, delivering towels to toilets around London for a number of years, and worked in a farm in France for a while, but then realized I really did want to continue my education, and long story short, got accepted at a university in the United States to go to graduate school in political science. Came to the United States and didn't mean to stay, thought I would sort of do the Jack Kerouac thing and on the road and the rest of it, but finally ended up finishing the PhD and coming to UMass Lowell in it was 1989, 88, something like that, as a staff person.
So you've been here for some time.
Yes.
I think I'll turn it over to the students for a question. Michelle?
What do you remember your first experience at UMass Lowell in becoming in contact with American students?
I would say my very first introduction to political science course I taught. I mean, I'd seen students on campus. As I said, I was working here as a staff person before I finished my PhD, and then came on as an assistant professor. And I sort of fell in love with the kids here. I mean, I loved teaching. I'd done some teaching before coming here, but in that first classroom, I remember there were like 55 students in the class, and they couldn't understand a word I said because I had this English accent. But they were intensely interested in me being English, and which was a nice opening to break down the barriers between professor and student. And we just immediately got into this really long conversation about what Europe was like and what the welfare system was like. And I thought, these are kids that the same that I was. They were the kids I was when I was younger, and it was an immediate bond, and I've loved being here ever since. And I will say right now that in this new administrative role, I do really miss the classroom. I'm not in the classroom anymore, and that's a big tragedy for me personally.
Connor?
What would you consider your most rewarding experience in your career at UMass?
My most rewarding experience.
What sticks out the most for you?
A student I had in the class who was a bad boy.
No.
He was really smart, and he was from a broken family, and he kept getting arrested for drunken disorderly conduct, as I recall. And I finally met him. I said, look, why don't you come and have a drink with me? I shouldn't impose on television. But we actually had coffee. I had coffee with him. And I told him that, he was a really smart kid, but he was blowing all this away. And I don't want to say to you, just work hard and get good grades. I said to him that the only way for you not to end up in some dumb job, in some dumb place, to have opportunities in your life, to do the things you're capable of doing, is sticking this out and getting a degree. And he came back and he finished. And he went on into the world. And later, many, many years later, in fact, I bumped into him again. I was in a restaurant in downtown Boston, and he was in the restaurant, and he came over and he said, I didn't even remember, I couldn't remember what he looked like, and he told me that he'd actually be involved, he'd worked around the records, he'd become a sound recording person. And he brought me my dessert, and he said I would never have stayed, and I'd never have done this, and I would have been either in prison or working at McDonald's, and that was the most rewarding experience.
Wow, that was really
That's a great
inspiring.
story.